more than a decade, he's been your destination for news, opinion, and passion.
Thank you, Chris, very much. You have a great show. You have a highly rated show, too, by the way. In case I haven't been telling you lately.
Good morning, Chris. You're my voice of hope.
We do have now some of the sound, as I told you. We're not, and the audience, we're not carrying his remarks live because, frankly, he says a lot of things that are not true and sometimes potentially dangerous.
This is Philadelphia's Morning Answer with Chris Stigall on Philadelphia's AM 990, The Answer, and 990theanswer.com.
It's great to be with you today, ladies and gentlemen. The telephone number 610-850-0990, 610-850-0990, and we're online at 990theanswer.com. Had to laugh. Rochelle Walensky, departing CDC director, warns of politicized science. In one of her final interviews as head of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Walensky telling the Wall Street Journal she wants Americans to make health decisions based on, quote, their own risk assessment and their own personal risks, but not through politics. Political partisanship has, in many ways, defined Walensky's tenure. Some of our biggest divides were based on jurisdictions and how they voted, Walensky said. Walensky acknowledged missteps in communicating during the pandemic. Said she found it difficult to balance health messaging for the scientific community and the general public. We had to do both at the same time in the same 90-second sound bites. But I find it very interesting to say you got to watch politicized science. Keeping with today's theme, headline from Fox News, CDC gives guidance for trans people chest feeding kids. Now, what is that if not politicizing science? The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's official website publishing advice for trans and non-binary individuals seeking guidance on how to chest feed their infants. In sections of the major health institutes' guidance on breastfeeding, it contained information for those who have had much of their breasts removed in gender reassignment surgeries or for biological men taking hormones to grow breasts on how to feed their newborn children. So the outgoing CDC director warns of politicizing science, and then on their website, they say that men can breastfeed babies. And we're the violent ones because we say, that's insane. It's violent for me to have even said that. John Vecchione, senior litigation counsel at the New Civil Liberties Alliance, watches things like this with great interest, I know, because the theme this morning, John, and I welcome you in, has been this increased, stepped-up notion that our very speech is now violence. Our objection, our questioning of their science is violence or misinformation and dangerous. Have you noticed this? This is, I mean, not that this is a brand new concept, but it seems like it's really heightened now. Speech that doesn't comport with the left is violent. It's misinformation. It must be stopped at all costs. And they're very comfortable saying so. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to be here. Have I noticed it? I've litigated it. Look, who
am I talking to, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this idea that speech that that the government disagrees with is harmful or dangerous, and you hear this a lot. I think it emerged from college campuses a decade or more ago, and it's now metastasized into this idea that disagreement is dangerous, or that it kills people if there's a message that's not the government's out there. And I think it filled people like Walensky, various people who we've sued, with this almost Puritan sense of righteousness to shut everybody up wherever they could. And that's this Missouri v. Biden. New Civil Liberties represents 4 individuals in that suit. The states have brought the case, and then we represent Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Koldorf, and Aaron Kennedy, and Jill Hines. And all of them were thrown off Twitter and Facebook and all these others for saying things that you should be able to say anything that doesn't threaten anyone or create a fraud, like Nigerian princes. But the thing is, they didn't do any of those things. And most of what they were saying has turned out to be absolutely true, has been adopted as government policy. It's certainly in some states, but even in the feds. And yet, because it was against the Walensky's of the world and the Fauci's of the world, these people were taken off the new public square at the government's behest.
I guess for a second, although I'm loath to do this, I will ask, is there a circumstance, and I really can't imagine it. This is hard for me to even ask the question because I don't believe in what I'm about to ask you, but I'm just trying to play devil's advocate for a second. Okay, so there's a national emergency stipulated. There's a virus sweeping the country. We don't understand it. We don't know what it is. And people are trying to get to the bottom of it and protect people. It goes back to that old argument of our founding. To what extent, to what extremes must the government go to, quote, protect us versus us shelve our liberties? Is there ever a circumstance where we're to embrace this idea of, hey, let the scientists and the people in charge be in charge and the rest of us just shut up? I mean, can you think of a circumstance where that applies? Because that seems to be the attitude. If the emergency is big enough, the rest of us should not ask questions and just shut up.
Well, this goes to, look, I think that in war, the first casualty of war is truth. So if you got troop movements, if you have various other things that are going on, sometimes but Congress hasn't declared war. And this goes to Wilson's whole idea of creating the moral equivalent of war for everything else, so that all society can be controlled. So I put it aside actual war, and the fact of the matter is, I have a disagreement. So many of my clients say that none of the measures taken in the first 90 days were okay, as the 90 days of the of COVID restrictions. And I have looked at a lot of statutes in the states, and the good ones limit emergency powers to 90 days.
Yep.
So to the extent, I don't think there was any reason to cut off anybody's speech about any of this stuff. There's no reason to cut off anyone's speech, because the real point of an emergency is when people don't know what's going on, the government says what it thinks is going on, and then everybody else critiques it so we can get to the right answer. So
Yes.
There was no reason to shut down speech at all. I'm not going to broadly state that there was no reason to, how about stop people from coming into the country or check them for temperature when they come into the country, that sort of thing. I'm not going to paint that broadly, but definitely there was no reason to shut down speech.
I couldn't agree with you more, John. I don't. Speech seems to be. It's First Amendment for that reason. I mean, it's the First Amendment, and yet it seems to be the thing that bothers the left more than anything else. When it came to people like Vivek Murthy or Rochelle Walensky or Dr. Fauci, the very notion of challenging them was called dangerous, and I find nothing more chilling and more dangerous than to hear government officials telling the citizens we're dangerous for asking questions or challenging their authority. I'm stunned that there's a single American who doesn't believe that, but I guess we live in such a politicized world now where if what is perceived to be on your team is saying it, then that's okay, I guess.
Well, not only that, but I have been amazed. I've been sort of on the conservative side most of my life, but I have been amazed at how many people get thrown out of the newspapers and the various places they've lived their whole lives when they said, I don't know if lockdowns are good for children, or, I don't know if forcing a vaccine that doesn't stop transmission is really the wise way to go. Saying those things got you knocked out of polite society in places like New York City, and then you have the government. You have Walensky. She went on TV and she knew that there was no study showing that the vaccines prevented transmission, but she went on and said it anyway because that was the message, and that's what she meant there in that quote you had of her about politicized and how she found it difficult. Yeah, I think that to her credit, she was less. She was less gung-ho about the lying. She did it, but she seemed less gung-ho than some of those other fellows you mentioned.
No, you're right. And in fact, there were times where she got kind of almost enthusiastic and out over her skis that I remember at one point she declared victory on Rachel Maddow's show. She had to rescind that pretty quickly, but at one point it was, hey, get the shot and we're all safe. She said as much. Yeah. So that evolved a lot. John Vecchione is with us, Senior Litigation Counsel at the New Civil Liberties Alliance. So the scientists that you represented, the doctors in this case, we're going to talk with Eric Schmidt a little later, who was the Attorney General of Missouri at the time and brought the suit, now Senator from Missouri. So, yeah, we'll speak with him as well. Speak to the difference between the role of the state here in this litigation and these individuals you represented. Okay,
so the state is focused on it. Well, first of all, they're suing on behalf of their citizens, and there's legal rubrics that allow that. They're not saying that the state of Louisiana or the state of Missouri was thrown off of Twitter, that stuff. What they're saying is they stand in for the vast amount of citizens who were injured in this fashion. We are saying specifically, here's what happened to us as individuals, as people. The three scientists did the Great Barrington Statement, and which said, look, here's how we traditionally treat respiratory viruses like this, and here's how we deal with them. We find the populations that are most vulnerable, and we protect them the most, and we do not shut down society. And within 4 days of publishing that, Fauci was on the line with his friends saying, we gotta shut this down, we gotta push this, we gotta push back. And lo and behold, all of the social media companies followed suit on that, and their messages started getting thrown off social media. And you even saw, you saw the whole society, particularly the whole media complex, take their direction from the government. But it wasn't just because, sometimes the conservatives think that everybody in the media wants to do this. But what we found in our discovery that the judge allowed before this preliminary injunction, we get to ask questions of the social media companies and of the government. We deposed Fauci. What we found is that the social media organizations, they wanted to hear what the government said, but they weren't gung-ho throwing their users off their sites. That's how they make money. They were very, very hesitant to do this, and it was the constant pounding. I always say I don't quote Stalin much, but there's one saying attributed to him that quantity has a quality all its own. The amount of contacts government-wide pounding on the social media companies every day, certainly every week, some directly from the White House, like Flaherty. It was extreme intimidation across all government, across months and months and months. And there's always the threat, the Psaki getting up there and saying that, we think they should be doing more, and the president saying people are dying, and then all the administrative agencies following those orders. It's really incredible. And so I don't, they always say, oh, these are private parties doing this on their own. They were not. Humpty Dumpty was pushed. So that's my view of that.
John Vecchione with the New Civil Liberties Alliance. This judge opened with a quote from Harry Truman, and I loved this quote in the conclusion. Once a government is committed to the principle of silencing the voice of opposition, it has only one place to go, and that is down the path of increasingly repressive measures until it becomes a source of terror to all its citizens and creates a country where everyone lives in fear. Now, if there's somebody that understood fascism, it was people of the era of Harry Truman. They'd literally been to war
communism.
with it.
He basically he was at the beginning of the Cold War, the end of World War II. He was on either side,
Yes. So my point is, he better understood what it meant to live under a repressive regime than most. The Eisenhowers, the Trumans, they literally went to war with it.
That's right. And the other thing that he's quoted a number of things. He released this on 4th of July, and I see that some people have criticized him for that. But he did it because if you go through this, it's 155 pages. The order is very short. You can see what he prohibited and what he didn't prohibit. But the memorandum that goes with it explains exactly what our discovery found, what happened to my clients, what happened to people around the country, and why the government was responsible for it and not pure private action. So you're going to see a lot of, smoke being thrown up by people who don't like this, who want to continue to throttle the views of Americans they disagree with. And they'll throw up smoke and they'll say, this was all private action. Well, the 155-page memorandum explains why it wasn't and what the government was doing and what the response of each of these social medias was. So that's just not a non-starter. And he does use quotes from many, many famous Americans on why free speech is so important. And, it serves a teaching purpose, Chris, because unfortunately people have to be taught this more and more because, from the formative schools, maybe they're not really pushing this message, or they're certainly putting counter messages in that sort of drown it out.
Yes, and as for the scientists and doctors that you represented, Mr. Vecchione, are they what is their status? Did they suffer financially or personally, their reputations, I wonder, through this process? Is there any way to recuperate those, if so?
Well, their reputations, I think, are coming back because they were right. I mean, there's nothing like being a reputation, but I think that to some extent they've been deemed troublemakers, but they did suffer. This wasn't the social media, but they did suffer consequences in their professions. I mean, Jay Bhattacharya has written about what happened to him in academia, and the other two as well. They were these were highly cited scientists, and suddenly Fauci calls them outlier epidemiologists, which they were not. And that had repercussions, no question about it. And Jill Hines, who ran a organization in Louisiana that wants parents to control their kids' health care, not the government, she was really throttled down. And she's just a mom trying to make sure that the state isn't running the health care of her kids. And this happened all across the country. They're microcosms. They're examples, but they're not the only people.
Yep. John Vecchione, we're so grateful for your perspective, for the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and your representation of these people so well. Congratulations on a victory on the 4th of July, no less.
Thank you, Chris. And I just want to tell you one more thing. The other thing you'll hear, that's the smoke I was talking about, is that this will allow foreign interference and this will allow gangs and stuff. The judge in the order says the government can tell them when there's speech that's not protected by the Constitution, like crimes, they can talk to the social media about that. So don't let that persiflage go either.
NCLAlegal.org is the website for the New Civil Liberties Alliance. NCLAlegal.org. John Vecchione, litigation counsel there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chris.